This is an opportunity to learn together to discuss the critical issue of nuclear development in Canada.
Many people may be unclear about what the word nuclear means. It refers to the nucleus of an atom. Every atom has a tiny nucleus surrounded by orbiting electrons. And in the last century, it was discovered, science discovered that the most powerful force in the universe is the force that holds the nucleus of an atom together. By splitting a uranium atom, you can release enormous energy. It's very compact, very powerful, and it also doesn't release carbon dioxide because you're not burning anything.
The federal government is going all out to promote nuclear reactor development in Canada.
Canada is alone in the developed world to be plowing ahead on so many fronts in the nuclear domain.
New Brunswick signed an MOU with the provinces of Ontario, Saskatchewan, and more recently Alberta, to promote the development of these proposed reactors.
All of the problems of nuclear power have to do with the radioactive waste. There is a current policy review going on as to what to do with radioactive waste produced by nuclear power plants. Only small amounts of it get out into the environment at the present time, and that's good. They have done a good job at doing that.
The Green Party of Canada had a Zoom roundtable on nuclear power and small modular reactors. Did we hear why leading climate scientists have been calling for support of nuclear power?
The people who argue for all renewables think that, well, if we can go from 0% to 10% to 20% renewable, then we're on the way and then it will get easier and we'll get 100%. Well, it's actually, if you look at the engineering, it's actually the opposite. When you get to 20 or 30%, then it gets harder, not easier, because of the intermittency of the renewables.
Did Canadian Greens just go pro-nuclear? No. No, no, no. The moments I showed you were out of context. That Canada is leading the world in SMR development was portrayed as a very bad thing. The only moment in the roundtable that was actually informative was when Dr. Gordon Edwards explained how nuclear power is a low-carbon source of electricity.
It's very compact, very powerful, and it also doesn't release carbon dioxide because you're not burning anything.
62% of Canadians think that it's high carbon. From mining to storing used fuel in a repository, nuclear's entire life cycle is all ultra-low carbon. IPCC estimates nuclear's worldwide life cycle carbon footprint median value is 12 grams per kilowatt hour. Worldwide, nuclear power is ultra-low carbon. Canadian nuclear power is even lower, 3.2 grams per kilowatt hour. Canada does not enrich uranium. Canada's nuclear infrastructure is powered by cleaner energy. Canadian nuclear beats absolutely everything. Why do only 38% of Canadians know that nuclear is low carbon? Ever since the public learned about global warming,
we don't need to invent anything new. We just need to stop wasting time with distractions like nuclear power.
Anti-nuclear organizations began lying about nuclear power's low carbon footprint.
CO2 emissions? Ha! Not with nuclear. There's not a cleaner energy source out there.
Now calculating. Carbon footprint of nuclear is much higher than wind and solar.
Everything pales in comparison to nuclear.
Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, Sierra Club, they all help fund this message. It is based on an outlier paper which was garbage. All of these so-called environmental organizations now admit that nuclear is low carbon. Anti-nuclear organizations protest the cost, they protest the existence of used nuclear fuel, but no mainstream anti-nuclear organization disputes the fact that nuclear is low carbon. Not anymore, they don't. And I sincerely thank Dr. Gordon Edwards for undoing a bit of that misinformation that we've all been exposed to. Misinformation that he, as an anti-nuclear activist, was never responsible for. Now here's the Green Party's roundtable on nuclear power.
I can't wait to get into our discussion today. Dr. O'Donnell is the lead researcher with Raven, a think tank. Dr. Edwards is the president of the Canadian Coalition for Nuclear Responsibility.
I'll be the pro-nuclear advocate who is never invited to participate.
We'll start with Susan.
That the federal government is going all out to promote nuclear reactor development in Canada. This whole push for proposed nuclear reactors is coming from an industry that's dying.
This conflates Canada's small modular reactor startups with older, established nuclear vendors. Canada's attention is focused on the new startups. In fact, the Green Party's attention is focused on the new startups as well. In 2011, Atomic Energy of Canada Limited sold the rights to its Canadian reactor technology, called CANDU, for pennies on the dollar to SNC-Lavalin for a mere $15 million. Whether Canada maintains our reactors to operate for hundreds of years, or we decide to prematurely shut them down, SNC wins. It is precisely because SNC only wants to sell CANDU overseas that there's a big gaping hole in Canada's clean energy market, which will be filled by small modular reactors.
The plan to develop SMR technology is far too slow to address the climate crisis. It's going to take decades to build them.
Before 2030 is when the first SMR will come online. Until then, Canada should pursue other means of decarbonization, but this is not an either-or case of opportunity cost. I don't expect people improving solar panels to drop everything and build nuclear reactors, just as I don't expect people improving solar panels to drop everything so they can start working on wind turbines. There's a place for every low-carbon energy source. Each one has unique advantages. Nuclear power is the only low-carbon form of energy generation which does not suffer from geographical constraints. Nuclear can be deployed anywhere on Earth and pack essentially unlimited power production onto a tiny footprint of land. There is already worldwide demand for small modular reactors because utilities around the world are aware of these features. Have nations around the world decarbonized with 100% renewable energy? Yes, when that renewable energy includes hydropower. But not ever, not anywhere, without hydro. Only 2 energy sources have decarbonized grids anywhere on Earth: hydropower and nuclear power. Denmark is flat, so it can't harness hydropower. Denmark is as close as any country has ever come to decarbonizing without hydro. Yet, their carbon intensity is still higher than nuclear-powered grids, such as France, Sweden, and Ontario. To back up wind and solar, Denmark needs to burn hydrocarbons because they have no hydropower. Small modular reactors are worth the licensing delay, not just for Canadian provinces without hydropower, but for countries around the world without hydropower, or countries around the world that have maxed out their hydropower potential. Let's not forget, hydropower has environmental consequences. I live in Alberta, and we have very little hydropower. Canadian Greens have only ever elected in ridings rich in hydropower. They can pretend their grids are powered by solar and wind every time they brag about renewables. There is no grid in Canada entirely powered by solar and wind. It is always hydropower that provides the most value.
They're only designs on paper, and in fact, experts have called them PowerPoint reactors.
Every single SMR design is based on a nuclear reactor which has already been in operation. Yes, going from experimental reactor to commercial reactor is a slow process and costs a lot of money, but that has everything to do with the licensing process. The molten salt reactor experiment was designed from scratch in 1960 and was an operating reactor by 1965. That's 5 years to conceive of a completely novel reactor design, build it, and then start splitting atoms with it. I'm told that if the only challenges facing an SMR vendor was safety, construction, and budget, a modern-day molten salt reactor could be up and running within 4 months. They could start building one right now. Nuclear in Canada is highly regulated. That is a good thing. But there's nothing about small modular reactors that hasn't been tested already. What's new is commercialization and mass production.
It's going to cost billions of dollars from taxpayers.
The startup I'm most familiar with raised $40 million in private equity. Our government invested 20 million Canadian on top of that. Invested. That's not free money from heaven. I view it as one of the best possible investments our government could be making for us. Why is the Canadian government investing in SMR? Because the first of anything is very expensive. Apple spends about $10 billion on iPhone R&D every year. In a sense, the very first iPhone Apple manufactures for a given year is a $10 billion phone. The second iPhone costs about $500 to produce.
When we got news about 18 months ago that you three had signed the initial memorandum of understanding on small modular nuclear reactor technology, my first reaction was, what about us? How did you forget Alberta? So I'm glad that we're now in this group to work together to find a Canadian solution for power production that is zero emitting.
The reason our 4 provinces are working together with the federal government in a collaborative fashion is to share the development cost so we can all share the production reward. This is a new thing for nuclear power. These are assembly line reactors.
We've got to get in this game so we can have a SMR platform that we could sell around the world, including to meet Alberta's future energy needs. And with that, we'll now sign the agreement.
Please contrast this with solar and wind feed-in tariffs. Those are money from heaven. Those aren't investments. There's no shared Canadian equity.
You're likely aware that New Brunswick signed an MOU with the provinces of Ontario, Saskatchewan, and more recently Alberta to promote the development of these proposed reactors. And one of the interesting things about this MOU is that it actually binds the parties to only talking about the benefits of these technologies, to only talking about the economic and environmental benefits, and not to talk about the risks.
That's not true. The MOU is not a bloody gag order. Any Greens who doubt this, please read the MOU for yourself. It's 6 easy-to-read pages. Also, the part she's mischaracterizing is non-binding. It says so explicitly in very easy-to-read language.
Another thing that the MOU binds the governments to doing is to promoting nuclear energy as a clean technology that's required as part of the climate change solution, which it's not.
Dr. James Hansen says nuclear is required, the godfather of global warming, and there's no instruction in the MOU anywhere mentioning anything that can't be discussed. Nowhere. Dr. Susan O'Donnell is fabricating that claim.
To that MOU, only talking about the benefits. That doesn't do anyone any justice for any subject. We need to balance our conversations always.
If the Green Party wanted to hear both sides, I think they would have invited a nuclear advocate to this roundtable.
I'd love to pass it now to Dr. Gordon Edwards.
Many people may be unclear about what the word nuclear means. It refers to the nucleus of an atom. Every atom has a tiny nucleus surrounded by orbiting electrons. And in the last century, it was discovered, science discovered that the most powerful force in the universe is the force that holds the nucleus of an atom together. Consequently, we learned in 1939 that by splitting a uranium atom, you can release enormous energy. If this is done in a bomb, you can destroy a whole city, such as Hiroshima. If it's done in a nuclear reactor, you can use it to boil water. And when you boil water, you get a lot of steam, and that steam can be used to turn a turbine and generate electricity. But that's the good part, because we get the energy, it's very compact, very powerful, and it also doesn't release carbon dioxide because you're not burning anything. So those are good things. But on the downside, we are producing hundreds of radioactive poisons which never existed in nature prior to 1940.
Nuclear reactors are a thing that happens in nature. We've found 17 so far, in Oklo in the Gabonese Republic in Africa. The reactors are no longer operating, but we can see how seawater washed into a cave and enabled natural uranium to start splitting in an energy-creating chain reaction. It happened 1.7 billion years ago, when there was still only ocean-based life. That 1.7 billion years gives us a real-world test of how nuclear waste was stored in a natural geological repository. The plutonium created by the reactor has moved 2 meters since the chain reaction first took place, almost 2 billion years ago. That is not far. By the time our sun expires, the plutonium will have spread 5 more meters through the rock.
All of the problems of nuclear power have to do with the radioactive waste.
I would have said cost. Conventional nuclear reactors cost billions of dollars, and we need to get that cost down, which is why Canada is developing small modular reactors. But I'll entertain the notion. Tell me more about waste being the problem.
On the downside, we are producing hundreds of radioactive poisons which never existed in nature prior to 1940. And these poisons are indestructible, and we don't know really what to do with them anywhere on Earth.
They're not indestructible. To chemists, they're indestructible, in the same way a chemist can't turn lead into gold. But nuclear scientists can turn lead into gold. They did so 35 years ago. Inside a reactor, such as the one that will be built by Moltex, today's spent fuel will evolve into something else, something a little more used up. This is similar to what we're doing today with natural uranium in our existing Canadian reactors. Fission products are what's created when a big atom, such as uranium, splits apart into 2 smaller atoms. But some uranium atoms don't fission, and instead change into plutonium. that plutonium can eventually be split up into fission products too. If we keep fissioning, meaning splitting, our uranium and plutonium, then our supposed million-year problem becomes a 300-year problem. Since 2011, I've been trying to make people aware that these technologies exist. There's actually lots of amazing stuff we can do with used nuclear fuel to liberate even more energy from it, and to reduce how long it will remain radioactive. Or we can stick it in a deep geological repository. It really doesn't matter. Both approaches have been demonstrated to work. Here in Canada, we should pursue both. That way we can generate the most clean energy possible from our uranium. And we also have a safe place to store every possible waste, even if that means burying a 300-year problem in a million-year repository.
And we don't know really what to do with them anywhere on Earth as to how to store these things safely for such enormously long periods of time.
Oh hey, did you hear that thing about the natural reactors in Oklo? Even if we don't reprocess our fuel to make it a 300-year problem.
When there's a nuclear accident, what it is simply releasing the inventory of radioactive poisons that are inside every nuclear reactor, no matter whether it's big or small. And consequently, anything, whether it's an explosion, whether it's an accident, whether it's an attack, that releases those radioactive materials can cause enormous damage over a very long period of time.
Chernobyl, the world's worst nuclear accident, killed 59 people directly, and indirectly will kill a total of 4,000 people ever, from here to the end of time. That's what the World Health Organization calculated based on radioactive materials which are constantly decaying away, how many people were already exposed to them, and how many people will be exposed in the future before the materials cease to be radioactive. If Chernobyl is reason to avoid nuclear power, surely Banqiao Dam is reason to avoid hydropower? The biggest energy-related disaster took place in 1975 in China. The Banqiao Dam flooded, directly killing 100,000 people, indirectly killing 150 more through starvation and disease. That's 250,000 people killed by hydropower.
Even now, 45 years after the Chernobyl accident, there's areas of land which are uninhabitable, and the same thing at Fukushima in Japan.
While some areas very close to the reactor are still contaminated, Chernobyl's extremely large exclusion zone currently functions as a wildlife refuge and keeps people out of the territory, most of which is harmless. Fukushima killed one person directly. 2,313 people were killed due to an unnecessary evacuation of a preposterously large area. In fact, many people conflate the tsunami's death toll with an imaginary radiation death toll.
We want to clarify a story we brought you Thursday. That was the 10-year anniversary of the magnitude 9 earthquake and tsunami that struck Japan's northeast coast. Nearly 20,000 people died. But we want to make it clear those deaths happened as a result of the quake and tsunami, not the nuclear meltdown that followed after waves hit the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant.
The tsunami and earthquake killed almost 20,000 people. Fukushima's unnecessary evacuation killed about 2,300. Fukushima's evacuation order has been lifted for most of the nearby towns. That hydro accident killed 40 times more people than Chernobyl radiation and the Fukushima evacuation combined. 40 times more. Now, none of these numbers give a complete picture of energy safety because they're all one-off examples. When you tally up the amount of energy generated by each energy source, and tally up the deaths caused by each energy source, you'll find nuclear power is one of the safest forms of energy production. Which is the least safe? Could it be hydropower? Well, hydropower hasn't killed a large number of people since 1975. Wind power is safe? Solar power is safe? We can make any one of these seem scary by citing specific accidents, but statistically, the only truly dangerous form of electricity production is coal. Coal combustion used to generate electricity kills 800,000 people each year. That's mostly due to fine particulate air pollution. Nothing newsworthy, no explosions needed, no trapped coal miners, just people like you and me dying from lung disease. Our kids' health impacted by lung disease. Coal waste actually kills people every year in Canada by the thousands. Coal waste is dumped into our air and dumped into our water. You know what nuclear power dumps into our water? Warm water. There's nothing in it. It's just slightly warm water. No one in Canada has ever been killed by a nuclear accident. No one in Canada has ever been killed by used nuclear fuel. Every single coal plant operating in Canada could host small modular reactors instead. Exactly as is going to happen to an American coal plant in Wyoming. That's a Bill Gates nuclear reactor to be built on a Wyoming coal plant to replace it. China is prototyping nuclear power plants designed specifically to sit atop coal plants so they can stop burning coal, but use their existing infrastructure. If we want to protect people living close to our power plants, then we should continue refurbishing our Canadian nuclear reactors, and we should start building small modular reactors on coal plants, and then start remediating the toxic coal ash. That's how easy it would be to decarbonize our grid, to clean up our energy production. Swap out coal, swap in nuclear. Done. Health Canada estimates that the number of deaths that can be attributed to air pollution in Canada is 14,400. We'd need 3 Chernobyls every year in Canada to top our air pollution fatalities. Is Canada gonna out-Chernobyl? The USSR was a gong show. Fukushima and Chernobyl were not out-of-the-blue incidents from otherwise stellar nuclear industries. Why is it so unreasonable to look at Canada's 40-year history of fatality-free nuclear operation and assume that we might continue to operate nuclear power plants safely into the future?
To call this clean is sort of like Trump saying that he won the election. It's a Trumpism. It's simply a downright lie. And, out of the Hitler playbook, Hitler said that the bigger the lie, the more likely people are to believe it. But there's no way that this is a clean technology. It produces the most dangerous waste of any industry on Earth.
Hitler, huh? By Graham, a fresh from the reactor spent fuel rod is the most dangerous energy byproduct on the planet. I'll grant Dr. Edwards that. Yet, used nuclear fuel from power production has never killed anyone on Earth, ever. Anywhere. That's because nuclear power creates waste, and it doesn't create pollution. It is contained in dry casks today and in a deep geological repository tomorrow. Every other form of energy should be so lucky as to have a waste stream that can fit in a cask. Coal waste is too big to contain, so we dump it in the air and in big piles that leach and spill into rivers. Wind turbine blades contain bisphenol A, an endocrine disruptor. In the fiberglass, a 1.5 megawatt industrial wind turbine contains about 10 tons of bisphenol A. These blades are being dumped into landfills. Solar panels contain lead, tin, and chromium. Thin film solar contains cadmium. Only 10% of solar panels are being recycled because the component materials have so little value. In fact, the life cycle cost of solar panels isn't just kept low because they're being landfilled when used up. 80% of solar panels are manufactured in China, where lax environmental standards help lower manufacturing costs. Much of the world's supply of polysilicon comes from China's Xinjiang region, where Uyghurs are being coerced into labor for the solar supply chain under the threat of re-education and internment. If we're going to talk about Hitler in an energy discussion, I've never heard Green leadership or Green MPs talk about auditing the solar supply chain coming out of China. It was a worldwide story that broke in April. If forced labor was used to create anything other than solar panels, wouldn't the Greens have spoken up about it?
What happens when you abandon this material, which is what the current plan is?
Abandon! In a deep geological repository. I mean, the site will be monitored for 70 years after it receives its final shipment of used fuel, and during that time, the most dangerously radioactive materials will cease to be dangerously radioactive. But whether we just added used fuel yesterday, or it's 70 years after the last shipment of used fuel going into the repository, it is a deep geological repository. There's already plenty of radioactive material under our feet. It's radioactive decay, which helps heat our Earth from the inside. If we didn't have the radioactive decay of uranium and thorium heating our planet's core, the Earth wouldn't have a magnetic field, our atmosphere would be blown away by the solar wind, and Earth would be as dead as Mars.
The Liberal Party did not campaign on an ambitious new nuclear expansion program, and technically they have no mandate from the electorate to embark on such a course.
You promised to build me a house, but you never said you were going to use a hammer and nails. The Liberal Party campaigned on a platform of addressing climate change. Liberals and conservatives agree that nuclear power is required to address climate change. This only sounds crazy to the Green Party. Greens keep consulting anti-nuclear activists for all their technical questions on nuclear. The Green Party keeps losing elections. Could it be that many people very concerned about climate change are not voting Green because Greens are anti-nuclear? After hydropower, nuclear is Canada's biggest source of low-carbon electricity. It's not even close. Nuclear dwarfs wind power, and solar power barely contributes anything at all. But Dr. Gordon Edwards is touching on a subject I've often wondered about myself. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau once lectured a room full of reporters on quantum physics.
Regular computer bit is either a 1 or a 0, on or off. A quantum state can be much more complex than that because, as we know, things can be both particle and wave at the same times, and the uncertainty around quantum states allows us to encode more information into a much smaller computer.
Imagine if it wasn't Dr. Gordon Edwards who had said the following, but if it had been Justin Trudeau.
By splitting a uranium atom, you can release enormous energy. It's very compact, very powerful, and it also doesn't release carbon dioxide because you're not burning anything.
It's not crazy to imagine that. Something very similar happened in the United States. Prominent liberals started to support nuclear power.
Trying to get rid of all the nuclear power plants that produce 20% of the nation's energy is not going to help us accomplish our goals.
Right now, nuclear is more than 50% of our non-carbon causing energy. Most Americans don't realize that. They really don't, and I was one of them. People who think that we can get there without nuclear being part of the blend just aren't looking at the facts.
I think it's natural to re-examine your beliefs as you age up. Nuclear is the best way to go for energy for the future.
You and I are religious fanatics, or have been, about anti-nuclear. Nuclear is bad, and we are the ones who should lead the discussion.
I remember the intensity of the nuclear debate, and I was on the other side of it.
This administration does not support the Department of Energy's Advanced Liquid Metal Reactor program and will oppose any efforts to continue the funding for this reactor project.
But given this challenge we face today, and given the progress of fourth-generation nuclear, go for it. No other alternative. Zero emissions.
We all know that there isn't 4 hours of sun here in Michigan every day, and so on those days there's no sun. How am I warming up my pizza?
In 3 short years, USA's Democratic voter support for nuclear power rose from 37% to 56%. That's an increase in support of almost 20%. Republican support for nuclear never changed. It just stayed at 64%. Canadians are dreadfully misinformed about nuclear power. 60% of us think it releases as much CO2 as the combustion of oil. It's time our mainstream political parties started sharing some basic nuclear power facts with the Canadians, so our citizens could learn that worldwide nuclear has a lower carbon footprint than solar, and that in Canada, nuclear power has a lower carbon footprint than absolutely everything.
We are being excluded from decisions which are going to affect our grandchildren's grandchildren. There's no parliamentary debate.
So here's what happened immediately after the Green Nuclear Roundtable.
The Minister of Natural Resources said that affordable, safe nuclear power is key to reaching Canada's climate goals. It is the nuclear industry who carefully designed and continues to perpetuate that greenwashed illusion. The reality is that competitive technologies like solar, wind, and geothermal are operational today. Even when facing these indisputable facts, this government allocated millions of dollars to develop SMRs, a hypothetical industry that relies strictly on massive federal subsidies and does nothing to resolve the problem of radioactive waste production. The risks are being ignored, the dangers trivialized.
From circle jerk straight to House of Commons. We don't need a debate. We need a shared set of facts. Support for nuclear among U.S. Democrats shot up from 37% to 56% in 3 years. That's almost 20% more support in 3 years. What happened? Progressives in the United States started challenging the anti-nuclear narrative, pointing out some very basic facts. not complicated stuff like a 6-page MOU that befuddles this green roundtable.
Which are going to affect our grandchildren's grandchildren. This is not right.
There's no way I'd ever want my family or my kids or their future kids to ever be exposed to used nuclear fuel. There's also no way I'd want to live near used-up solar panels. Once cracked, a solar panel can release mercury and lead when rained on. There's no way I'd want to live anywhere near a coal plant. The ash contains arsenic, chromium, lead, and mercury. The smoke contains sulfur dioxides, nitrogen oxides, and very harmful particulate matter. Back to nuclear power, I could see my family living safely next to a cask containing used nuclear fuel. Because it is contained. You can hug the cask, you can lean on the cask can get rained on. It doesn't matter. We know how to contain nuclear waste. It's not something I particularly want. I don't think anyone wants to be living next to a cask containing hazardous material. But for my family, I would take contained waste over pollution any day, because that's what the other energy sources create. Pollution. Pollution is uncontained waste. We might get some pollution in our water or our food. We certainly absorb pollution when we breathe in air around much of Canada. Pollution kills Canadians every single day. Used nuclear fuel has never harmed a single Canadian ever. That's because we know how to contain it, and that's because there's so little of it, we can contain it. First, in dry casks, the waste is contained in steel and concrete. Then, in a deep geological repository, the waste is contained in salt or rock. It's not hard to find excellent geology for storing nuclear waste. I hope we can build one in my home province of Alberta, too. Not because there's anything wrong with Ontario's proposed repository, it just might be less politically risky to have multiple repositories spread around Canada. I would gladly and happily live with my family atop a deep geological repository because it's a nothing burger.
Environmental assessments have been excluded for these new projects.
There's a limited environmental assessment review for reactors producing less than 200 megawatts of thermal power, or reactors sited where much more powerful reactors used to operate. Small reactors do not have the same risk profile as larger ones. An environmental impact review, in this context, isn't about accidents. It's about whether a piece of land should be used for nuclear power. For any new SMR planned to be built where a larger plant already exists, those concerns have already been addressed.
Canada is alone in the developed world to be recklessly plowing ahead on so many fronts in the nuclear domain. The Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission reports to the very same minister promoting the expansion of nuclear projects.
The Minister of Natural Resources has a mandate to protect Canada's energy security and to provide cleaner energy for Canadians. The Department of Energy used to be its own thing and was amalgamated into Natural Resources in 1995. The CNSC reports to the Minister of Natural Resources because that's the only minister that makes sense.
Until you became the Minister of Natural Resources, the words nuclear energy did not cross the lips of anybody from the Government of Canada.
Zero emission. Zero emission.
Maybe the minister is advocating for SMR because that's a technology which makes sense given his mandate?
Zero emission. It is
any way you can get there, right?
There is no panacea for this. There is no, if we just had more solar panels. No. Solar panels figure into it. Wind figures into it. Electrification figures into it. Hydro, all of this stuff. And by the way, there are consequences to every single one of these actions, to be very, very clear, right? Every single wind turbine takes 60,000 pounds of copper. I mean, I am amazed by the number of people who crap on me for supporting the mining industry. How the hell do you think we're going to build the batteries? How the heck do you think we're going to get to the electric vehicles? How do you think these things are built? I mean, if you grow up, as I did, either, on an island in the middle of the North Atlantic or in the subarctic in Labrador, you grow up to be a very pragmatic person. You are blindly and ideologically practical. And that is where I come from on nuclear. So I know what the waste issue is here, and I know it is tangible. We can see it. We know what it is. We can mitigate it. We have the science. We have the ability. right? It's far more distant when it comes to, the inevitable pollution that may occur from even renewables, but certainly with oil and gas, the carbon that we've been putting into the air for years without consequence or without a price, right? But nuclear, it's always been known. We know how to manage it. It is zero emission. It's something that we are extremely good at in Canada. So why we would, squash that competitive advantage is beyond me. CANDU reactors are still the gold standard around the world. We are a tier 1 nuclear nation. And we have an excellent regulatory regime around nuclear. It is actually a competitive strength for us. So we would be foolhardy to put that to one side. It is a part of it. I don't look to nuclear as a panacea. I don't look to anything as a panacea. I don't believe in panaceas. But nuclear gives us that stability that Ontario has enjoyed in this country more than any other province for decades now. And we need more of it. And the idea of small modular reactors is it just allows for, greater versatility and greater deployment. The Americans are on it. Even, right through Trump, they were on this. I don't understand other jurisdictions that have given it up. Germany particularly. I mean, Germany increased its coal extraction after they decided to shut down nuclear plants. That's not clear-eyed thinking on lowering emissions. I'm sorry.
We need regular reporting to Parliament on the status of radioactive waste issues and costs.
Canada's utilities that use nuclear power pay into trust funds to finance future storage. In 2020, their combined value was $5.4 billion. A financial report on these funds is issued annually. It can be read by anyone. It took me 2 minutes to find it.
And finally, we need a balanced, deliberative process to advise the government and Canadians about the advantages and disadvantages of nuclear projects.
Canada's Small Modular Reactor Action Plan was created with input from over 100 industrial, educational, academic, municipal, and Indigenous organizations. Dr. Gordon Edwards laments that Canadians are not being informed about nuclear power's disadvantages. 60% of Canadians think it releases as much carbon as burning oil, when in fact it is the single lowest carbon emitting source of energy in all of Canada. But that's just me and my concerns, right? Maybe there's some Canadian out there who never heard the term nuclear waste before. He says the greatest challenge facing the nuclear industry today is the question of nuclear waste.
All of the problems of nuclear power have to do with the radioactive waste.
I actually received an email from Dr. Gordon Edwards back in 2011 regarding an SMR design. Back then, I was still trying to determine if nuclear power was good or bad, and if it was bad, how could it be made better? Because the one thing I had learned just then was that nuclear power is low carbon. This particular SMR created waste that only lasted a few hundred years. It's kind of like nuclear waste reprocessing, all bundled into a small modular reactor as a single unit. I thought it was pretty exciting that you could build a reactor that didn't need a deep geological repository to put the waste in. How did Dr. Edwards respond to this, given that he sees nuclear waste as nuclear power's biggest problem? Well, he wondered what would happen if a bomb was dropped on the reactor. As it happens, nothing, but that's where his mind went. Then he called uranium a non-renewable energy resource. Well, uranium is actually a renewable energy resource. Seawater contains uranium, and that uranium is constantly being replenished by uranium leaching out from the Earth's crust at the bottom of the ocean. Now, we don't harvest uranium from seawater because we don't need to. Canada has enormous uranium deposits, and what we don't use ourselves, we export for profit. But if we ever wanted to extract uranium from seawater, we could extract uranium from seawater, and it would just leach more uranium out of the Earth's crust. Then, Dr. Gordon Edwards told Elizabeth May, "It may be that one day, after all the power reactors have shut down and folks have weaned themselves off nuclear power, some version of these concepts may be useful for waste management purposes. But not now. To do it now would just be unleashing the dogs of nuclear expansionism, leading to a mad flurry of activity that the whole world will end up regretting." It was when I received that forwarded response, I saw the Green Party's inability to give nuclear power a fair evaluation. The Green Party doesn't ask SMR vendors, doesn't ask nuclear engineers, and doesn't ask anyone for input except established institutional anti-nuclear voices. So since 2011, when I first noticed the Green Party consults anti-nuclear advocates with all of their nuclear questions, to now 2021, 10 years later, not a single fatality from Canadian nuclear power in this 10 years or any years before, 0 deaths, 10 more years of safety. What's changed with the Canadian Green Party and nuclear power? Absolutely nothing. And I'll tell you, that's why a lot of people very concerned about climate change are not voting for them.